It's time to talk about the Preakness. The second jewel of racing's Triple Crown is coming up on Saturday, May the 18th. I am Gino Bucola here alongside my good friend Angela Hermann to help me out as we're going to go through all of the 8 runners now in the field. We say 8 because there was a big scratch a little bit earlier on today. We'll give you some thoughts on each of them, what their chances are of competing and winning the Preakness, some positives, some negatives, as Angela Hermann from Canterbury joins me. And Angela, we're talking on Wednesday, May the 15th. I know that it's a big weekend coming up for Canterbury with your opening night.
It is. We will start out on Saturday evening. So the Preakness that we're going to talk about a little bit more is going to take place between our first and second races. So we're going to leave a little bit of time between there. Things will kick off about 5:15, and then hopefully you take all your winnings from the Preakness and just parlay it up through the night. It's a really good 8-race card, and we really couldn't have drawn it up much better for our opening day. With everything being so uncertain in horse racing, it's really nice to see a lot of familiar faces, some new faces, and full fields to kick us off on Saturday evening.
So a big Saturday that'll start with the Preakness, and then a lot of racing from Canterbury coming up after the Preakness. For all of you who want to play that big race on Saturday, you can get to drf.com and check out the past performances right now for Saturday, Pimlico Preakness Day. There are also betting strategies and DRF picks available. For the betting strategies for the Preakness, it's going to be Dan Illman, who covers everything, Laurel, Pimlico. He knows all of the circuit. He knows the local horses so well. And then David Aragona, who is, in my opinion, the best when it comes to making the morning line and one of the best handicapper gamblers that you'll say. And Angela, you know, I have a pretty large ego. I don't really say that about too many people. So David is definitely, he's up there, and he's one of the sharper ones you'll find. Past performances, betting strategies, DRF picks, shop.drf.com. And then here's the field for the Preakness now with the scratch. Muth is out. Angela Baffer had 2 horses entered, trying to get his 9th Preakness. He already has a record 8, and we saw him do this last year with National Treasure. The last few years with the ban from Churchill Downs, the Baffert horses are not allowed in the Derby, so they have been pointed and primed for the Preakness. And National Treasure was the winner last year, and Muth was a very logical, deserving favorite. But I think the scratch of him, it's not positive in any way, because obviously we don't want to ever see the best horses getting sick and getting hurt. But if you liked Muth a lot, you thought that he would be logical here. Maybe the opposite. If you thought Muth was vulnerable, he's going to take really all of the value out of the race, unfortunately. Like, if you wanted to bet one of the other horses, you're just going to get such a different type of price than you would have.
Well, yeah, it's a lose-lose. You
Yep.
do lose a horse that was going to be a key in a lot of people's wagers, and he robs a lot of the value from the race by not being in it. And I think that some money will go some directions it should, maybe some directions it shouldn't, but that's what we're going to talk about as we go through the field. And I mean, one of his biggest contributions was going to be keeping an honest pace going. And I think that that's been a lot of the talk since he did scratch today is, where is it going to come from? Is it going to be a walk in the park for his stablemate? And how is everybody else going to have to adjust their styles, and how do we adjust our wagers accordingly? So plenty to delve into, and him being out at least early enough gives us time to prepare and to make those adjustments.
Okay, let's get through the field, and let's start with the number 1, Mugatu, for the Zoolander fans out there who comes into this race. He was 180-1 in the Bluegrass. And when you're just looking at his form recently, he's really going to have to improve to compete. I love when horses like this, who they don't pay a lot for, and you have not the biggest name connections, take chances in big races. The ownership group is named Average Joe Racing Stables. I mean, you have to just love that right there. But just based on what he's done so far, he hasn't hit the board in his 3 stakes races, and he hasn't hit the board on the dirt yet. So he really would need to improve a lot to compete with these.
And I think that he couldn't have got much better of a setup than what he got in the Bluegrass. And he did make a good move on the inside. You know, he moved up going into the turn, and you really thought he was going to carry that momentum on, and he just didn't. And I do respect the Bluegrass, though. And of course, my top pick for the Derby was Sierra Leone. And even though Just a Touch had a brutal trip and dropped back, I still think it's going to be one of the races that we can use going down the road with some of these 3-year-olds.
Yep.
Even though he was 5th, And even though his dirt races do stand out as, I mean, even though the figure came up good in the bluegrass, it wasn't one of his better performances. He's got some things to prove, but he will probably retain most of his value. I think a lot of the horses to his outside won't. That's what keeps him in the picture for me. But the inside two are hoping that the horses run the races of their lives. Even if they
Yeah.
don't win, that's the hope with these two. And
Yep.
it's easy to root for them at the entry box, but not as easy to back them with your dollars. I think of the two big long shots of the field, and it's going to be these two, I would lean towards Mugatu, but Muth being out of the race definitely hampers him, and Catching Freedom, I believe, probably more than anybody else. So he gets
Yeah.
downgraded in that respect, but it'll retain his value. So he's kind of a question mark for me. I'm glad you brought Zoolander into it. I didn't have to do that. But to get him to run the race of his life would probably still only get a piece. So if you're a vertical sort of person, he's useful to you. If horizontals are more your thing, he's a reach. So I'm going to use him underneath, maybe in tries.
The number 2 is Uncle Heavy. We have Irad Ortiz Jr. Aboard, and this horse's best races have been on off tracks, but he's run fine on a fast track as well. And if you're playing him and just saying that the Wood is a race that you would toss, he had a bad post position that day. He had a slow start. He was 10th of 12 early. He was about 10 lengths off. I actually thought the race, when you watch it, is better than if you just look at it on paper, because he does pass horses late when he's way out of it early. So if you can eliminate that race and you're projecting with him to step up from his 84 to like a middle 80s and then one more step up, like I can maybe see it, but I had a tough time with really either of the two inside horses. And that's what was like difficult for me, finding real big value in here, because I couldn't quite get there. And then I wonder also if he's just going to take some of the Irad Ortiz Jr. money.
Of course, I think they call it the IRAD tax in
Right.
Florida. At least that was the term that I heard.
Mm-hmm.
But I would incorporate him more, of course, on a wet track. He is useful in that sense, because I think if it does rain, and that forecast has changed a lot, so much more money is going to go to Mystic Dan than to him. But they kind of bring the same skill set, just he's not quite as fast. I would really only use him if the track comes up wet. He's just run slow, and he's come from off the pace.
His best buyer speed figure is the slowest of anyone in the field. Just plain and simple. At an 84, and everything's not about just buyers and stuff, but when you're talking and comparing horses, it's just nice to say, hey, we're going to use buyers for a comparison of how they all are, and his are the slowest. It's just, I have a tough time seeing that much improvement for him in here.
Yeah, and I would like to see, if a horse does run his peak race like that, that he was maybe geared down, and that's why something came back slower, or the final time might have come back slower. If he was already in front by a pole, they didn't get to the bottom of him. He only won by a nose, so they were getting to the bottom of him.
All out on a sloppy track, and that might have benefited him, right? So I completely agree with what you're saying. It doesn't feel, at least, like there's like a little more to scratch the surface on than what we've seen. And if you're projecting improvement with some horses, that's what you want when you're doing your handicapping. Really cool horse right next door, Catching Freedom. I mean, he just shows up. He's either improved or run about the same race in all of his races. His Kentucky Derby was good. I mean, he was fourth. He didn't really have a trouble trip, but he was down on the inside, and there was a few times where he just kind of had to wait before he went behind horses, and he kind of had to wait for another opening. But it was a good ride from Pratt. He always seems to ride the Derby really well and just keep horses out of trouble and not be the reason why they lose. And I mean, if you flipped him with maybe a couple of the other horses and got slightly different trips, he might have finished a little bit better. I think it's a major positive that the connections want to wheel him back in 2 weeks, because they weren't talking about doing that before the Derby, and they don't do that, Brad Cox in particular, at all. Like, he's not someone who wheels back horses quickly. It's just now without Muth, I wonder if they're going to be going like crazy, or I just feel like that takes a lot of either the speed or pressers out of it.
I actually don't mind Catching Freedom. I wasn't a big fan of his in the Derby, but I thought as soon as they crossed the line, he was going to be everybody's Belmont horse. He just gives you that notion because of how far he comes out of it, how quickly he closes. But I don't mind this if Muth had stayed in. I would have really liked him. because he's going to be a more fair price than he was in either of his first 3 starts. Maybe not 8-1 like he was in the Derby, but you weren't going to expect that anyway. I thought maybe you could get 9-2, 5-1 on him, and that's more than fair for a horse that has the consistency that he does and the record that he does, and you know what you're getting. But if it was any quicker of a pace than I think it'll be, he would probably be my top pick. He's just going to be another horse that is going to be up against it with the smaller field now, with a little less pace to it. And even though, Muth being out of it gives them one less hurdle, Catching Freedom still has to make up a little bit of ground on Mystic Dan, and he needs to prove that he can take another step forward. He leveled out a little bit as far as figures go. Yep. He was still coming at the end. I just don't know if we've seen his best shot yet. If we haven't, he could definitely win. If we have, I'm going to limit him to a piece.
Yeah, and the key too is price, because I'm very curious with him. Like, I think we'll get to Tusk and Gold and Imagination. I'm pretty confident that both of them are going to take a lot more money than what their morning lines are now, and I think those two will be the ones that really take a lot of the Muth money. I'm not positive with Catching Freedom. I mean, I think he'll certainly come down a little bit, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's pretty close to that 6-1. If he is, that at least makes him a playable price, like you were saying. Like, even though his chances of winning might be a little bit less with the way the race shapes up, it would be built into the price there. So if he's down under 5-1, though, that's where I start getting like if I see those dashes in there, then I'm nervous. The 9-2, the 7-2, which is a Frank Miramotti thing. He loves to say the 7 dash or the 9 dash all the time. Good old Frankie. Shout out to
Frankie Bases. Hi, Frankie Bases, wherever you are.
So I mean, I don't, it's not like I have a whole lot of negative things to say about Catching Freedom. I just like his chances of winning a little bit less without Muth in here.
I feel the same way. And Brad Cox doesn't ship too many 3-year-olds over to Pimlico. He hits the board with a lot more of them than he does win. And a lot of them have run second in recent times. It doesn't matter what level it is. Doesn't matter if it's a stake. They've just hit the board a lot. They're very usable in that sense. But with the money that his horses typically take anyway, I'm just like you. I'm going to wait and see with him more closer to post rather than some horses that I feel more definite about using in my wagers.
Pratt won the 2021 Preakness on Rombauer. The number 4 Muth, he's out. And again, that will really change the complexion of the odds on everyone. Mystic Dan was 5-2 on the morning line. He definitely will not be 5-2. He will be much shorter than that. And this guy ran a really nice race in the Derby, Angela. It was a fantastic ride from Brian Hernandez Jr. in just multiple ways. He got out of the gate so fast, just so much faster than everyone else. You look around and Mystic Dan's like a length ahead, and then he just got to pick what he wanted to do. When the horses all to his outside wanted to go really fast, he just carved out a nice spot right behind them, wasn't ever more than 5 lengths out of it. He moved up real nicely in the inside, and Brian Hernandez, just every time he asked, it was the right time to ask and the right button, just really impressive. And he has a couple big races, and he definitely has a form that you want to upgrade on and off track, like we've seen. So there's a lot of positives about Mystic Dan. He won the Derby, but before that, he had speed figures that were just some of the higher speed figures. He wasn't always the most consistent, but he was one that you knew could throw up a really big race. And now all eyes will be on him as, really the horse to beat. And I think because we're talking about the horses that come out of the Derby and their chances of winning this, he really does it's a great spot for him. He's the deserving favorite, and he has like a tactical edge on a horse like Catching Freedom, who's probably pretty close to him in overall talent. Catching Freedom's actually beat Mystic Dan before. They've traded decisions. It was a fun, feel-good win. I think people were happy for the connections, and it was a good ride. It was well-deserving. It was unless you were Angela and needed Sierra Leone, it was a good finish there, a fun, exciting finish for the Derby. Talk to us about the Derby winner, Mystic Dan.
Well, I was almost glad that they didn't get up Sierra Leone and Forever Young, just so that the stewards didn't have to get involved with a result of the Kentucky Derby.
Yep.
And the ride the ride that he gave Mystic Dan was impeccable. And it's a great example of knowing his horse very well. I mean, he's ridden him in 6 of his 7 starts. He's kept him close to the pace. He's kept him a little bit further off it, but the horse listens to him, and the horse trusts when they get into that sort of spot and relaxes. I mean, it's not like he was rank or trying to get up and over heels. He just did what he was told to do, and he did it very well. Now, I know that the main drawback to him is now going to be his price, but some people would try to poke holes in the fact that Ken McPeak has vocalized before that this horse does better with a little bit of time between his starts. But he has only had 7 starts. There's nothing to say that the horse can't improve, surprise, and maybe be better now that he's gone 1.25 miles and cutting back in distance. Maybe he's going to a track that he'll handle very well. It's just hard to say. And you do, I mean, obviously, a horseman like Ken McPeak, you believe what he says and you trust that the horse might be better off with another week. But he looks like a happy horse when he trains. He runs like a very sound-minded horse. And I don't mind the fact that they're going to give it a shot. I don't think that they feel unduly pressured into it, because they were also very plain that if he wasn't coming into the race that they wanted, or the way that they wanted him to, they wouldn't run him. So with Muth being out of the picture, his price is going to stink, but I think he has nothing really that I can poke into him that would make me think he wouldn't be at least on the board. It's hard to get around him. It's just hard to play him given the value that's now out of the picture.
Yep, I completely agree. He's solid, and his Arkansas, the races when he didn't run all that well, you sort of look back at them now, and because the one was on a quick turnaround, and that was like early on in his 2-year-old season. You know, he's just a different horse now. He's bigger, he's more mature, he's just, you know, he's so much more developed and grown up. And when you do things when you're young versus when you're just a little bit older and more experienced, I don't think it'll be the short turnaround that beats him. If like what beats him, maybe it's the kind of trip, right? Because I think they're going to want to be more forward in here than obviously we're in the Derby. So I'm imagining that imagination goes from the outside, and then I'm assuming one of the Lucases goes, and I think Mystic Dan is going to be kind of in the mix with them. Like, I don't think he's going to be too far out of it here. What trip do you project for Mystic Dan?
Very similar to what you laid out. I don't think that Brian Hernandez will shy away from the rail. And if he drafts in right behind Imagination, and as you alluded to, probably sees the gray, that would be my guess.
Me too.
I think that he and perhaps Just Steel, my top pick, would sit in a similar spot just off the pace, which they seem very comfortable doing, whether the pace is fast or slow. It would be a matter of him getting through the same way. And I think we'd be very naive to think that the riders are going to make an effort not to let him through the rail the same way that they did in the Derby. So he could find himself in a sticky spot. And I agree with you on that point. I just don't know if he minds. And I don't know if Brian Hernandez would mind waiting, and bursting through, because he can move. I mean, get through any sort of opening that appears at the top of the lane. That could get him beat at a shorter price. So I would rather take my chances with a horse that might be in a similar spot early, like a Just Steel, and have a clearer run at things. But like I said before, I really don't have anything to argue with anybody who supports Mystic Dan, other than there's other races on the day to make a little bit more money with better prices.
We have the two Dwayne Lucas runners right next door to each other. You have the Pat Day Mile winner first, Seize the Gray, who won the Pat Day Mile at 9-1. If you would have told me Seize the Gray is going to win the Pat Day Mile, wouldn't have been the most surprising thing in the world. He was cutting back from the Bluegrass. He was in the Jeff Ruby Stakes before that. He faced some nice horses. If you would have told me he was basically on the lead early in that race and then like backed up a little bit and came on again, I would have been very surprised, because that race had a lot of speed on paper and some very, very fast 3-year-olds. But he showed kind of a new dimension. I mean, he'd been tactical before, but that was a little surprising to me on the cutback. And when that works for you, generally you come back and you try to give the same trip. And when I'm looking at Seize the Gray versus Just Steel, and I'm seeing Joel jump on Just Steel, that maybe signal to me what you were just getting to, that I think if I had to pick one of the Lucases that is going to go, I would say Seize the Gray. And reading a recent quote, it sounds like Dwayne says the same thing. I don't know if he'll be on the lead, but he's going to be close. And that just, that gives Just Steel some more options to where he doesn't have to be that far back, but he can finish.
And I think they won't be too far apart early. I would just guess that Seize the Gray would be the more likely candidate to ensure that Imagination isn't going 51 and change or anything early. But I would imagine one will follow the other. And both of their riders know the horses well. And Rosario's been the only one that squeezed a couple of wins out of Just Steel. He did keep him close to the pace in both of those. I mean, they were dueling in that maiden special weight, but that's, I mean, that was so long ago. Just Steel is a much different horse. He's not consistent, and that's what will make him a decent price. I don't think double digits is in order, but people will look at that Kentucky Derby and just go, whoa, and back off, maybe wave a little bit. But I'm just counting on a similar effort to the Arkansas Derby. Just if he can keep himself in the neighborhood, not burn himself up early like he did last time, and the pace is reasonable. I think that, I mean, Lucas has kind of shown you with these two, with the paths that they've taken to get here, that he maybe thinks just a touch more of Just Steel. They paid an awful lot for him. But I like that you mentioned on a previous cast that I had seen you before, Bob Baffert was Mr. Preakness. Dwayne Lucas was. And I mean, he knows the kind of horse, the kind of trip. I mean, he's very familiar with all of it. And if he thinks that both of these two should be in here, I think at least one of them will get a piece. I don't think that he'll be as big a price as Seize the Gray, but I think he's usable in just trying to hit one of those good races that would put him in the picture at the end and provide some value.
Well, it's nice to know that people do watch some of those things that are out there and listen. So thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, the Just Steel is the horse that I've been warming up more and more to with the Muth scratch. And the way that I think the race will be bet now, I don't know if the horses that could have represented value before, like Catching Freedom, like possibly either Tusk and Gold or Imagination, like those tier of horses, someone was going to be value there. They weren't all going to get bet with Muth in it. The problem is now without Muth, they're all going to get bet a little bit. Just Steel will come down also, but to me, I think he just represents probably the most value in the race now. However you want to play that, or however you want to use him, if it's betting him to win or throwing him in your tries or adding him in pick 4s and 5s because you want to make sure you have at least one kind of big price horse. He's the one that has interested me the most, I think, since the news of Muth being out, how I'm kind of tweaking my handicapping.
Yep. Agreed. And I liked him a little bit in the Kentucky Derby, and I won't get 21-1, but everything that I liked prior to that, I think applies better to a smaller field with less speed, with an outside draw, and with Joel Rosario. So, I mean, if I like him in one spot, I got to give him a look in another one. And unless I see something that just blows my mind from anybody else in here, he's also beaten Mystic Dan a couple of times in recent times and beat him well in the Arkansas Derby. It's not like, I mean, it's not an overwhelming likelihood, but it's enough of a likelihood with the difference that these two are going to be on the board that if you did take the Derby out of it, they should be a lot closer, and they're not going to be. So I'm going to take my chances with him and at least center wagers around him. Even if I don't use him on top in all of them, I'm definitely going to put him back in the mix and hope that he gets back to those good races. He's at points gone back and forth between good and bad races. Maybe we get a good one out of him with a little less distance and a little different tactics.
If there are a couple horses that I'm not worried about the quick turnaround with, in particular, it's a horse like this he's raced 12 times in the 12 months he's been racing, since he started last year in June.
It's such a Lucas prototype these days.
It is. It's
roll
like
him in, see what happens.
If you were to just like AI what a Lucas horse would be, right? It's kind of this one where you'll have some of those races that just go off, but overall a pretty consistent body of work. And the horses can kind of jump up and have big races. They kind of win in different ways, usually are speedy. Lots and lots of more positive things about Just Steel, including the price as we get closer to Preakness Day.
Instead of letting him frustrate you, try to catch him at the right time.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and this will be one of the times that you can try to catch him at a nice price. Tusk and Gold is the wise guy horse. He is raced 3 times, and you can understand why he is the wise guy horse. His debut, it wasn't a bad race at all. He was behind Sierra Leone that day. That was his only start at 2. His 3-year-old debut at Gulfstream, he won nicely. And then in his second start of the year, he was in the Louisiana Derby. He had a really wide trip that day on March the 23rd. Kind of some bumping going into the turn. He was 5th of 6 early on. he was about, he kind of moved in between horses. So the race has come back live, Angela, also. I mean, he was really, really wide. You could see he moves from like sixth kind of up into it. And I just don't think that's the type of trip that he was ready for yet, without a whole lot of foundation, only making the second start back. Like, I get all the reasons why people will like him coming into this race. The Louisiana Derby's come back strong. Catching Freedom was fourth in the Derby, and we saw Antiquarian, who was sixth in that race, come back and win the Peter Pan. So it's already become a live race. It's just the price. What's the price going to be on him? And I feel like he's going to be 7-2 in this race. And can he win? Sure. Is he going to be a good bet in this race now? I just don't think so.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely most room to improve. And I would guess maybe a touch higher, maybe about 5-1, something like that. But he did take the necessary step forward in the Louisiana Derby, and he did get kind of green and tired down the stretch. And he finished up on his left lead. But when Chasing Freedom and Honor Marie came to him, he did have a response. And I think that there were some lofty expectations, obviously. He and Just Steel were both bought out of the same
He was
sale
kind
for
of
a lot of
grinding.
money,
Yeah.
but they're different. They're very different horses by now. So, I mean, Tusk and Gold might be a summer Derby sort of horse, a horse that I would look for just after this season, because he'll get a lot more out of it. But that doesn't mean that he's up to par quite yet with some of the more experienced horses to his inside. So for, like you said, the price that you will get with people just hoping that he takes another big leap forward, that's a lot of hope for a horse that's going to be in that neighborhood on the board. And Tusk and Gold, just, it doesn't get the pulse racing off of that. You kind of go, what more is there? And what more is there with the connections that he has is almost never something that you're going to get rich on.
This is such a tricky race for me from a gambling standpoint, from just like, how do I think you and I were talking before, like, I'm not going to be betting anybody to win in this race, most likely. I know I'll have, exotics coming into this race, and then I'll watch it. And if there's maybe Just Steel is a good enough price for me to play, but I don't think I will get enough of a price to play on Tusk and Gold. If he was 6 or 8-1, that would probably be playable for me. And I can understand like him checking so many of the boxes for people, coming into the Preakness. Chad Brown's done a really good job with this race in particular, targeting this race. He's a 2-time Preakness winner. We've also seen Gaffleon win this race before. So there's a lot of success there with the connections, lots of positives. I just don't know if he's going to be playable enough. And the real question will be, is there one particular horse that takes a lot of the Muth money, or is it spread around from like between the main contenders? Do people go,
I think you just scroll to the answer,
right? There's not one Baffert. Does the other Baffert get a lot of that money? And Frankie Dettori is a very popular, well-known rider all around the world. And it's not as if Imagination has done much wrong in his career. He's never been beaten by more than a couple lengths. He's never been worse than second in his 6 starts. And he's lost to a couple of really nice horses. So I think with the outside draw in particular, the fact that there's no other Baffert in here, not Muth, to where you would even wonder if one of the two of them was going to go and the other was going to sit. Pretty simple game plan for him, right? Like, he's going to be going and just trying to clear from the outside.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Just hit the gas. And I would imagine that the outside two are going to be the horses that get bet down the most, just based on the humans, not what the horses do. But fans of Imagination have to be the most angry about the scratch of anybody, because they thought that they could get by with the other Baffert. And this horse has never been higher than 3-1. You were going to get that more in the Preakness. You might not anymore. And people are going to bet Dettori. People are going to bet Baffert. But I mean, they've even shown in the mornings that Muth is just maybe going a little smoother at the moment. And I know that you did fancy Stronghold a bit in the Derby, and he did give a glimmer of hope at the
he didn't run
stretch. But I mean, I think going forward into the Derby, you would have liked Stronghold's finish in the Santa Anita Derby maybe a little bit better, maybe some of the previous races. Imagination is one of those, kind of like Catching Freedom. We've seen the best that he has. And if nobody goes after him, then that's great. But he's just, I can't envision him getting everything to fall his way. But I mean, I was also a detractor of National Treasure. So if things do fall that way, then Imagination is going to be on cruise control the entire time. I think just like Mystic Dan not getting in through the rail, people are going to make sure that Imagination doesn't lollygag along. And the prices both of them are going to be, I mean, we're contrarians anyway, but Imagination is a horse I'm not interested in.
And I guess this could be a positive for him in that I don't think he's going to be ridden in this race the way he was in his last few races. I feel like they're going to try to be more aggressive because he waits on horses. There have been 2 or 3 times, Angela, when he was sitting off horses, when he loomed up and he looked like he was going to win those races by 5 lengths. And in the race against against Wind Me Up in the San Felipe, he looked like he was going to air in that race. Against May Moon, he looked like he put him away. And May Moon battled back on the inside. And then in the Santa Anita Derby, he got the benefit of the jump. Stronghold kind of got in a little bit of traffic. It wasn't a trouble trip, but he kind of got shuffled behind horses a bit. So there were multiple times where it looked like he was sitting and going to move. And that might just be distance as well. But I really think they'll try to get out and get some more separation if they can. And I can't see that in my head. That's how for me at least, and I know everybody does it differently, but I have to always play it out in my head. How can I see the race unfolding? How can this horse win? Can he clear and win? Sure. Do I think that's going to happen here? No.
Yeah. And if the track is a conveyor belt, then, it will definitely help his cause. It will hurt his price. But logically, in any of those, somebody should have came and got him. And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But if they're not coming to get you at Santa Anita, they're more than likely going to come get you at Pimlico. I didn't have any interest in him to begin with, but now if you strip away the value, no matter what sort of speed he shows, no matter what kind of lead he gets, I'm going to look another direction.
So I do feel bad for poor Ashley Mayu, who I'm doing a lot of the previews with now on DRF when we're doing stake stuff. And she now has to hear me whenever I have to have a corny pun or when I'm singing about something, she has to deal with that all the time. So earlier today, I was talking about how Frankie is going to be singing because when I watched this, when I saw this horse and I was handicapping the Santa Anita Derby, I was watching the new Wonka movie with Chalamet. And so I will forever associate this with the Willy Wonka and that song, so forever, I will always see Imagination and be thinking come with me and we'll be. And so I feel bad for poor Ashley because I think there's probably gonna be a lot of times in the coming weeks and months where she's going to be rolling her eyes and going, oh no, but
I'm not doing that right now at all.
Yeah,
I know. A decade's worth of training.
I was gonna say you could have given her the warning, Angela, and helped a friend out over there. But that's what's really funny too about handicapping a card of races. When you're handicapping, a horse racing card, you don't ever really know where the names are going to take you. They can take you in any direction with some fun movies, some fun songs, some fun memories, and different rabbit holes. But we kind of finish up our thoughts on the Preakness. And from a value-based standpoint, it sounded like you were really leaning towards Just Steel being the horse that you think may represent the most value in here.
Yes. I think that he'll represent the most value, and I won't be playing him to win. Like you said, I don't think that he's consistent enough where if you're going to make a win bet, you should be more confident than I am in him. It's just using him in exotics that's most appealing to me because he typically, well, at least recently, hasn't been bet. And if you're going to deal with a short field anyway and some ifs and the morning line favorite scratches, then it becomes a little less appealing race to play anyway, but you have to get more creative and give more shots to horses like him that don't always show up, but when they do, they can fit with these at a price.
And you were just kind of hitting on I think a real important point also. It's the Preakness, so it's one of these big races where I think sometimes we feel like we have to have a pick or a bet, or it doesn't have to be that way. You can have a few horses you like, or you can have an approach and a mindset, and then just be ready to make an audible if that value changes. So I know for me, Just Steel is definitely going to be a horse that's in the pick 5s and the rolling exotics for me. And then Mystic Dan, definitely. And Tusk and Gold will be from a closing exotics. I think he can win. I just can't get, I'm really not thinking he's going to be anything representing value from a win-in standpoint. But if I'm alive coming into this race, I want him on my ticket. The one that I probably the most confused on about the way the race shapes up is Catching Freedom, because I like him. I'm just a fan of him as a horse. He's really cool. He shows up. He was my pick in the Derby, and he didn't even run poorly enough to make me go, oh, I was way off there, And so I don't even want to jump off him overall, but I just have a hard time now in this smaller field picturing him at like anything other than 6th early. Like 5th at the most,
Yeah. And it's a double-edged sword though. Either you take the horse out of his preferred running style or you put yourself at the mercy of what could be a slow pace.
Yeah.
That's what draws me away from him.
Exactly.
But I mean, I agree with you. He ran his race. It's easier to take a losing bet if your horse put in an honest effort and a few things could have made him a winner. And the same thing with Sierra Leone. I mean, he ran his race. He would have been deep doo-doo had he come across the line first. So just letting it play out as it is. I wasn't upset at the end of the Derby. I think Mystic Dan and the ride that Brian Hernandez gave him deserved to win that race. And even if he wasn't, the best horse going forward, we're going to find out that there's proving grounds like this where opinions of him will change. So I agree with your assessment of the Derby. The Preakness, far more cloudy of a picture, even though there's less horses because of the scratch.
Yep. And horses that aren't separated. I think you have Mystic Dan, whose A races so far have been higher than what we've seen from anyone else. And then after you take him out of that, everyone else is pretty evenly matched. And Mystic Dan hasn't been a horse that shows that effort every time. So that's what makes this a very intriguing race where you have your Derby winner back for the second jewel of racing's Triple Crown. He's trying to pick up the Preakness win. And then we have a fun few weeks of buzz, right? Leading into Belmont. How about Belmont at Saratoga this year, which will have a really different vibe and a feel to it. And I'm just curious what it's going to look like and how it's going to, feel when we're playing the races there. But Angela, it's a big weekend for your home court, Canterbury. They open up on Saturday night. You said that you like the card there and the way it's set up. Race 1, then the Preakness goes, and then after the Preakness goes, your card will pick back up with race 2 and on.
Yes. Yeah. We're going to start at about 5:15. Our second race won't go off until well after 6. We're just giving a lot of room for whatever, happens at the Preakness, delays, things get held up. They spin them a few more times. So rather than push the race card back that far and hope that they took off on time, we were going to take off on time and then just take a break between our first and second. The first is good. It's a really contentious race, and some horses that you might be familiar with. There's a couple of half brothers that are a couple of stalls in the gate away from each other, the Alligator Hunter and Crocodile Hunter. And it doesn't dissipate throughout the card. It's good. There's a couple of turf races. There's going to be a couple of pick 5s this year. That first one is going to start in race number 1, and the second one is going to start in the 4th. So there's some crossover races in there. There's some good young horses. There's some talent that are going to break their maiden on Saturday night. And like I said, if you make some money in the Preakness, you got a whole night's worth of cards or a whole night's worth of races to go through. And I am going to be doing a segment throughout the season. And, I do the angle, I'll pick a horse, but this year it's going to involve some more stats and trends, whether it be with horses, whether it be with trainers, whether it be the track. And we're going to involve the Daily Racing Form. That's going to be the sponsor of the angle. So yeah, keep an eye out for some of those. There is a horse that I have an angle with on opening night. It's in race number 5, and he's going to be making his debut. As I've mentioned before, and I'm sure other Canterbury personalities have mentioned before, we did lose Bob Lothenbach, sadly, this past year. And now his bloodstock has changed hands. And this one, Victorious Vanda, is named after a boxer making his first start. He was up here last year he was at Chicago last year, but he did make his way up here, gave him some time. And Joel Burnt saw fit to spend $40,000 for an unraced horse. And there were some other horses in the sale that went for less that have already made it to the track. This was a $100,000 yearling purchase. And he doesn't necessarily have the numbers to win early, but the Burnt Barn does extremely well with their firsters here. This horse is gorgeous. You can see some of his info online from the sale. His works are good. He had one of the best gate works at Hawthorne of the day, or actually was the best gate work of the day a couple weeks ago. And the talent has been there with this one from the start, and he is in the 5th. That's a good part of it. If you want to try to take value with him, if you like him too, if you think he's going to be bet down, you can use him in some horizontal sequences before the 5th comes up, including the early pick 5.
That's that crossover race. So that's one of the races you really want to make sure you're right about, because it'll be in both of those pick 5s on Saturday night, opening night over there at Canterbury. Angela, thank you so much. We look forward to watching the races and following along with you at Canterbury. We have the Belmont coming back in a few weeks. So I'm going to be sending you a message to come back and help us out and talk some racing with us in a few weeks if you're up for it.
Oh man, I'll be ready. I'll be ready. Hopefully we're all a lot richer and we have a whole bankroll for the Belmont at Saratoga. It still sounds a little weird to say, but it'll be fun.
It will. We'll be talking about that in a few weeks. Thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out with us. Don't forget, everything you need for the Preakness, past performances, betting strategies, DRF picks, available at shop.drf.com. If you want some help with some of the other races, Barry Spears joins me to do a pick 5 preview for Friday at Pimlico. Those are races 9 through 13 that lead you right into the Black Eyed Susan. And then Barry will join me to do a Saturday pick 5 for the same thing, the same races 9 through 13. So we'll have Friday video for a pick 5, Saturday video for a pick 5, and then this one with Angela where we just go through the Preakness runners individually. Hopefully we can help you out, lead you in the right direction, and make you some money on Friday and Saturday. Best of luck. We'll be back again really soon. And one more thing before we get out of here. If you're listening and you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, subscribe on there, throw up a like. I'm terrible about promoting the YouTube channel, and I'm going to try to post all the videos on there, so it'll help get the word out a little bit more. That will be a big help for me. Thank you so much, folks. Good luck this weekend.